As Ichigo enters his room after a long day at school, he spots a mysterious butterfly flying around in his room, as suddenly he looks to his left and sees a small woman standing on his desk as a small black portal closes behind her. She completely ignores him, looking cool as she jumps down and attempts to walk out of the room, as Ichigo kicks her across the room, saying, "You must be a really confident burglar." As eventually Rukia reveals herself as a Soul Reaper, telling Ichigo where she's from and what her purpose is here, as she hunts down a hollow in the area after exercising a ghost in Ichigo's room. Because of a disagreement, Rukia restrains Ichigo, but around that time, Fishbone D, the hollow Rukia was searching for, attacks Ichigo's house and injures his family, leading to him breaking free of Rukia's Kido, something that she says should be impossible for a human. From there, Ichigo tries to save his family from this monster, as Rukia helps him out and explains to him that he's likely this thing's target because he has a high concentration of Reishi, or spiritual energy, in his body. But as Ichigo starts to feel guilt because it's his fault that his entire family is lying covered in blood, Rukia tries to reassure him that it isn't his fault, as she's caught off guard by the hollow, who hits her in the head and sends her flying into a wall, which is not good. Ichigo stands alone in front of the hollow, ready to take it on himself somehow, as he challenges Fishbone to take his soul and leave everyone else out of it. But Rukia leaps between them, taking the chomp at full force to save him, seeing how brave this boy is. As she falls to the ground, she tells Ichigo there's only one thing they can do now, as she points her sword at him, saying, "You have to become a Soul Reaper yourself and take care of that thing." As she explains how she'll give Ichigo half of her power when he pierces the center of his chest with her sword, they introduce themselves to each other as Ichigo Kurosaki and Rukia Kuchiki, as the hollow leaps in their direction. At that moment, Ichigo jabs himself with Rukia's sword and we see an explosion of golden light, as suddenly Fishbone's arm gets lopped off and sent flying, and behind them we see for the first time Ichigo Kurosaki, the substitute Soul Reaper, in all of his glory. We've started to explain all the terms you need to know if you're planning on starting the series or you just need a refresh, and you know how characters in the series sometimes just stand there looking awesome while everyone feels like they're suffocating and can barely stand? That's an effect known as spiritual pressure, or Ryatsu, and it's what happens when two Konpakus, or spiritual bodies, interact or are near each other, where one of them has a much higher concentration of spiritual energy than the other. This spiritual energy itself is known as Rei Ryoku, and it's the energy that Soul Reapers, Hollows, and Quincies all use to create and power their abilities, with different races having different maximum power limits. Now, of course, a competent user can suppress their energy so they aren't just walking around advertising their full power. However, let's say you and I were both Soul Reapers and I was way stronger than you. If you suddenly pissed me off, I could let out more of my Rei Ryoku than usual and you'd start to feel heavy and short of breath. Now, imagine walking in a room with a captain or even Yamamoto himself, and you can imagine how stressful that would be. In Bleach, one of the most important parts of the story, or at least one of the coolest, are the many different blades the Soul Reapers use, and these Zanpakuto come in many different shapes, sizes, and forms. However, before we get to any of the fancy forms and abilities these swords have, it's important to note that every single Zanpakuto has an original sealed form. Now, we could get even deeper going into just how the swords are created, but in a Zanpakuto sealed state, it just looks like an average everyday sword. Now, this differs a little here and there, like with Ichigo, who has a massive gut-style broadsword, but eventually we're told that this is the case because commonly, Soul Reapers learn to control their Reishi, or spiritual energy, so that their swords are refined to the appropriate size and length for them, making Byakuya think that Ichigo's sword looks amateur and ridiculous. However, it can also be said that Ichigo's sword is so huge because of the massive amount of energy in his body and because of a lot of different factors in his life leading up to this that we'll get into a little later on. However, just know before a Soul Reaper sword ever goes into its second form, these can still be every bit as dangerous sealed, because for the entire beginning of the series, we saw Ichigo getting a lot done before he discovered the Shikai state, which we'll be explaining next. Every Soul Reaper sword has the potential to completely change in Bleach, and the first release that can cause a drastic change in the appearance of their sword is known as the Shikai state. Now, in this series, a Soul Reaper sword, or Zanpakuto, isn't just a blade, it actually houses a sword spirit within that is closely tied to the wielder of the blade, and you can literally consider them part of the wielder. The deeper the understanding is between the Soul Reaper and his sword is, the more likely it is that Soul Reapers can learn their sword's name, and by calling this name out, their sword releases into its Shikai form, which most importantly tends to mean they get access to powers they weren't able to use in their sword's sealed state. For example, we have Renji, who activated his Shikai during his first fight against Ichigo, and this changes sword from just a regular blade to being a sword that extends and is used in a completely different way. Another example is Hitsugaya, whose Shikai gives him control over ice, and you can see how this sort of ability is a great thing to introduce into a series like this, because it meant that characters could all be unique, despite the fact that almost everyone fights with swords. But now let's talk about how Ichigo transformed his sword for the first time. Every sword, or Zanpakuto in Bleach, has the secret potential to evolve, being released into its final form called Bankai. Now, in our series of videos explaining everything there is to know about the series, we've explained how exactly a Soul Reaper activates their Shikai, the state before this. But for Bankai, this is something left for only the strongest in the Soul Society, as typically you'll only see Captain Class characters being able to unseal their swords like this, despite the fact that there are actually a few non-captains who've managed to activate their Bankai as well. Now, when a Soul Reaper is truly in tune of their Zanpakuto and its inner spirit, its true name is revealed to them, and by calling it out, they're able to to unseal their swords into its truest form, giving them access to brand new abilities they couldn't use before and drastic power-ups that take them to an entirely different level. Some good examples are Byakuya's Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi, which takes the form of several giant blades Byakuya summons as he activates his Bankai that all scatter into millions of cherry blossom petals that each have the same sharpness and cutting power of a blade. Byakuya is able to control these cherry blossoms freely and basically shred his opponents apart. There's also Renji's Bankai, which takes his ability to stretch his sword to the max, actually manifesting a giant snake skeleton that he can control and even fire strong blasts of Ryatsu from. Have you ever seen a character so strong they're banned from using their ability in their home world? Well, in Bleach, that's the case for Gote 13 Captain Shinji Hirako, who was actually banned from using his Bankai within the Soul Society because of just how dangerous it is. Shinji showed up in the series earlier as part of the Visored Squad, who all had Hollow Mass and trained Ichigo more or less on how to use his. Now eventually we learned they all have a history with the Soul Society and are actually extremely powerful, and from the beginning, Shinji's ability has been really annoying to deal with as he shifts his opponent's perspective of up and down, completely disorientating them. When Shinji uses his Bankai though, and here's the reason he can't ever use it around any of his friends, his sword activates an automatic ability that creates a giant range of effect where everyone inside perceives their enemies as their allies and their allies as their enemies. If Shinji were to use this at a Gote 13 meeting, we'd see all of the captains fighting each other to the death, completely destroying their system. But I'm glad that in the anime they added a scene in the 1000-Year Blood War where he uses it because it's awesome. But did you know there are other characters who are banned from using their Bankai in certain situations? This is the case for Captain Kyoraku, whose Bankai is another one that could potentially target allies since it affects everyone within a certain range. So to ever be able to use this, Kyoraku has to be sure that only he and his opponents are around. But on top of that, being able to use this ability really depends on the mood of his sword, because if it isn't in the mood to play, I'm not even sure he can do any of what we're about to explain. Now this Bankai can actually be really difficult to explain, but the long and short of it is that Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju releases an ability that forces Kyoraku and his opponent to basically play out an imaginary show or game where they have to follow the rules of the Bankai. This typically plays out in several determined acts, and across the different acts, you go from having holes all over your body that you bleed from to being drowned in an ocean that drains all of your Ryatsu. At the end of the 4 acts of the Bankai's imaginary story, Kyoraku can tie a white thread around his opponent's neck that he can rip off to cleanly behead them. And this is all apparently meant to symbolize the story of a man who hurt his own lover and unalived himself due to the trauma. So at the end of the day, you play a little game, go through a little story, and then he tells you to unalive yourself, and it's GG. I can see why you'd want to be nowhere near this. Soul Reapers have a strict hierarchy that they work under in Bleach, and it goes from the top where you'll find the Captain Commander all the way to the bottom where you'll find the trainee, still trying to even get into their first Gote 13 squad, anywhere they can fit on the roster. Now in between these ranks, of course you have the captains, the leader of the 13 squads, who are all extremely powerful. But how do you even become a captain? Well, for some squads it might be as easy as just defeating the last captain, and I know I use that word easy like that's not probably the hardest task a person could give you, but at least if you fail there, you took the quick option. Another way is just by earning the respect of other captains, getting personal recommendations from 6 out of the Gote 13 captains, as well as 3 approvals from any of the remaining 7. This means the majority of the captains have to approve you taking whoever spy you're after, or to fill the role in general. But there's one more surefire way to at least prove they are entering the range of captain level, and that would be to reveal your Bankai, since the ability to completely release your sword into its Bankai state is definitely one of the things that looks great on your resume, and tends to land you the job 9 times out of 10 from what we've seen in the series. There are spells that Soul Reapers use besides their sword abilities that can be useful in plenty ways, and these are called Hado and Kido respectively. For Hado number 1, Show, it allows the user to send out a burst of kinetic energy from their fingers that can push a target away and is strong enough to even damage the ground if not used carefully. Another interesting one is Hado number 4, Byakurai, which we see quite a few times throughout Bleach media, especially in the games. And this one also involves focusing the Hado into the hands of the user as they release spirit energy from their hands in the shape of lightning towards their opponents. Finally, the last Hado we know from the first 10 is Hado number 89, Moeru Danmaku, another hand-based ability where the user channels the Hado into their palms facing outwards, allowing them to shoot out a bunch of fiery projectiles that can engulf their targets in flames. Throughout the series, we get a few mentions of the Soul King, the king of the Soul Society, which is a pretty massive place with some extremely strong people running around in the Gote 13. So of course, you'd expect the king himself to be pretty powerful, right? Well, the surprise eventually comes that the Soul King is really nothing more than a tool to allow spirits to transfer from one world to another, with the goal of maintaining the flow so the barriers between the separate realms don't collapse. Because of this level of importance, he was eventually placed under guard and sealed away, but not before his arms, legs, and his heart were removed, something that actually didn't kill him, as each of these body parts went on to become sentient and seemed to become their own life form with incredibly strong powers. 2 of these body parts joined the Quincy army, and they're seen in the final arc of the series, the 1,000-Year Blood War, while another became a mysterious shadow entity that haunts the Soul Society, using the ability to completely halt progress on anything it uses its ability on. These are just the 3 that we know about, as we actually haven't seen the personification of the Soul King's legs anywhere, but it's possible that they've both run off to locations that we just haven't seen them in yet, like the possibility that one of them can still be somewhere hidden in Hueco Mundo or on Earth, and the other could be in Hell. In Bleach, of course, there's the Soul Society where souls go after their lives end. However, in the series is also the concept of Hell, which is a very real place in the world of the series, but it's also a little complicated. You see, a lot of lore about Hell in Bleach comes from the movies surrounding this location that people go back and forth about whether or not it's canon. However, at the very least, we do know that humans and hollows are both sent here after sinning in life, with it obviously taking something pretty bad to get you a one-way ticket here. But given that a huge part of Bleach takes place in these afterlife-like areas, you could literally defeat a character in Hueco Mundo and run into them again in Hell if you ever went there, which is pretty awesome. The scary thing is Soul Reapers with insanely high spiritual pressure also get sent here, regardless of whether or not they were evil or good, because that's the only way to handle the amount of reishi they have, as Earth wouldn't be able to reabsorb it properly, and that would lead to all sorts of existential problems. Now, we have seen this place recently in the most recent Bleach one-shot, since of course Kubo is still cooking, with many thinking we might actually see some more from him soon, but let's talk about that a little later. One of the biggest mysteries in the series is the presence of the Hell Butterflies, strange creatures which are often seen beside Soul Reapers, but they've also been seen to linger in the Soul Society. We know very little about these things other than the fact that they likely do come from Hell. However, the reason why has seemingly been lost to time, or is a closely guarded secret, as we don't even know how the Hell Butterflies arrive in the Soul Society or are assigned to the various Shinigami in the first place. One theory is that these butterflies accompany Soul Reapers as part of an ancient contract, giving them free passage through the Bankai and linking them to Hell in some way, likely as part of the mechanism that sends extremely powerful Soul Reapers to Hell as well as Hollows. Regardless, because of their appearance in the recent chapter of Bleach that will seemingly tie into whatever comes next for this series, I'd expect the mystery of just what exactly these things are, as well as what their purpose is, will be explained soon by Kubo. Every society is bound to have some sort of prison system, and in Bleach, there's actually one in the Soul Society made specifically for extremely powerful characters, a pocket dimension under the first division called the Muken Prison. Now, this prison is home to characters like Aizen, where he's sealed at the end of the Aizen arc, using special bindings meant to completely seal his power as he waits out his nearly 19,000-year sentence due to the fact that he's immortal. And extremely long sentences like that aren't uncommon in this place, since again, it's specifically meant for characters they either aren't allowed to kill or literally can't kill. The thing is that aside from being a prison, the Muken is actually pretty useful to the Soul Reapers, being a massive, nearly infinite void that they can use as basically a testing range for some of the most dangerous abilities in the series, like how this ended up being the battleground for Unohana versus Kenpachi when they were trying to help him awaken his Shikai and Bankai to save the Soul Society from the Quincy invasion. Now, as useful as this place is, the Central Division was actually willing to completely lose it when they sent Kyoraku in there to make a deal with Aizen, hiding the keys to the place in his heart, as Aizen realized the Central Division would seal the doors forever if Aizen took the chance to take them, pretty much putting him and them both in a lose-lose situation. A lot of people think that Aizen could basically walk out of here whenever he feels like it, considering he only got more powerful after being sealed, but let's talk about what that probably is, as well as the other prisoner being kept here. We've been explaining everything there is about Bleach, but also going into some of the earliest moments in the series, like when Orihime's character was introduced into the series, and we met her chilling in class thinking about Ichigo the day after he became a Soul Reaper, as she explained she finds him funny, and that's what she likes about him. As the story goes on, we learn that her brother died 3 years ago in a car accident, and she's been showing up with some pretty serious injuries lately that Ichigo and Rukia both notice. That night, Ichigo is attacked by a hollow, and when he cuts his mask, he realizes that this hollow was the spirit of Orihime's brother, as it gets away for a while, returning to her as a Orihime into her spirit form, trying to attack her and Tatsuki. Ichigo arrives just in time as Orihime learns that this is actually her brother, and it's at this point where Ichigo realizes that Orihime is a soul chain, so her brother says it's too late to save her because she's already dead, as he knocks Ichigo out of the building, and this fight continues. We've explained how Orihime's brother said that she was dead because her soul chain was visible, but how do souls in the chain even work? Well, in the series, souls are referred to as konpaku, which is your spiritual body, if you will. In the world of the living, where all matter is made up of kishi or atoms, if a person dies, their konpaku or soul will be chained to their living body, where a Soul Reaper can either use Hado to bring them back or do a soul funeral to send them to rest in peace. Now, if a soul were to break its chain, it won't be able to return to its body, and the chain of fate shrinking or being removed is what causes someone to become a hollow, as you can tell by the huge hole in their torsos. Unlike the living world, in the Soul Society, everything is made up of reishi, including the konpaku, which would just be your body here, and you can think of reishi as spiritual atoms or particles that make up the same role that matter does on Earth. Hollows in Bleach have some pretty crazy abilities that are shared between their race, just like every other group in Bleach. Like their most basic ability, Hueco, an outer layer of hardened skin they can start to build up to make themselves harder to kill. This is almost as useful as the ability to regenerate from damage, which they can also learn as well, but the third basic ability every Hollow should learn is how to sense and measure Reiatsu, an ability they call Pesquisa. Now beyond those basic techniques, you have stuff like Bala, which allows the Hollow to fire masses of Reishi at an opponent like an SMG, and although these things aren't the strongest, getting hit by a bunch of them could also still be really bad. Once a Hollow gets even more powerful, they can learn the Cero technique, which trades their Bala's rate of fire for one large and powerful laser beam, usually used only by Menos Grande and above. Now of course there's also the more powerful Grand Ray Cero, which is a devastating upgrade to the usual Cero, and it's way easier to land this attack with the Hollow Sonido ability, as it serves as their equivalent to the Soul Reaper's Flash Step and allows the Hollows to match them in speed. In our quest to explain all of the important Hollows in Bleach, I think after Fishbone D, the next most important Hollow chronologically from the beginning of the series has got to be Grand Ray Fisher, a Hollow with a serious link to Ichigo's life even before he got his powers. In the series, this Hollow lived inside of a river in Karakura Town where Ichigo lives, and like an anglerfish, this thing used a lure, but its lure was shaped like a girl who would sometimes appear to passerbys that would curiously reach out and be eaten by this monster. This beast is the Hollow that ended the life of Ichigo's mother during his childhood when she stopped an attack from it that would have ended Ichigo instead. However, after being defeated by Ichigo for the first time when he got his powers, it came back as a lower level Arrancar class Hollow, making it far more powerful than before, as it returned to Ichigo's house, caused mayhem waiting for him to return, until Ichigo's dad comes out and settles the score for the family, finally avenging his wife after all these years, and revealing that he too has been a Soul Reaper all this time. As Ishin explains that he's as strong as a captain, so this beast never had any hope with its simplistic powers. So on to the next Hollow. Hollows evolve like any other organism, so how does one go from this to a major threat for a captain from start to finish? We've already explained just how ordinary Hollows are created from the souls of those who can't rest. However, low-level basic Hollows are just the beginning, since if a Hollow starts eating their fellow Hollows over in the world of Hueco Mundo, they're able to gain even more power, giving them small fragments of their individuality back and keeping them from remaining mindless. During a feeding frenzy, all the Hollows can merge together into a Menos Grande. These giant Hollows you've seen early on in the story. However, this is more like a beehive, and inside sometimes there's one Hollow who stands out from the others that can take over the body and become a stronger, denser being known as Ahucha. And these Ahuchas have to keep eating to maintain their sanity and this form until they're powerful enough to become Vasto Lords, a much more humanoid class of extremely rare Hollow, known to be even stronger than the captains. Now let's talk about the strongest Hollows with no mask. Grimmjow Jaggerjax is one of the most popular characters in Bleach, and there's a reason why. First off, Grimmjow earned many people's respect when we saw his backstory of how he went from a low-level Hollow to a more powerful Panther-style creature, until ultimately working his way up the food chain into a Arrancar status. After his mask was ripped off as an Arrancar, Grimmjow took on a humanoid form with blue hair, and he prides himself in his speed and power, treating life like it's all about the survival of the fittest, with the strongest at the top. However, even if he has a bit of a problem with authority, nothing annoys him more than Ichigo's face, and when it comes time to battle, he's not only able to use the most powerful Hollow energy technique, the Grand Ray Cero, but he's also able to awaken his sword and go into a resurrection form. So I guess we'll go into detail on how exactly his Pantera form works next, but man, is this guy awesome. Growing up, he was probably my favorite character in the entire series, so I need the anime to pop off when he comes back. But the ultimate technique for any Hollow, the pinnacle of their strength that they all strive for, is resurrection. We've explained how in this series, Soul Reaper's powers are sealed in their blades, and they can achieve different states to achieve higher power levels and gain interesting abilities. For Hollows, resurrection follows those same exact principles by basically unleashing their sealed soul to its full and true essence. This is especially true because in these transformations, they take on more characteristics of what they looked like as a base level Hollow, and gain massively raised speed, strength, and all-around stats. Some easy examples of this form that you've probably seen are Grimmjow's Pantera transformation and Ukiyora's two forms he goes into as well, with Grimmjow completely forsaking a sword for powerful claws and a long mane of hair, as Ukiyora loses his sword as well and gains massive wings, a very long spiked tail, and all in all looks like an utter demon as he uses energy weapons. Grimmjow's Pantera form is the second best looking one in all of Bleach. He achieves this transformation by using his Hollow Resurrection ability that we've already explained on the channel, but man oh man, when he claws his blade and transforms, just seeing him standing there, you could tell this man is about to be the fastest thing you've ever seen, and he doesn't disappoint. In Grimmjow's Pantera form, he completely forgoes the use of a sword, replacing it with his claws instead, and thankfully he can project energy from those claws to extend them, but keep their sharpness intact, meaning at the very least this form makes Grimmjow 10 times more deadly as every single finger becomes like its own sword. Good luck trying to focus on his hands as he kicks you around the battlefield and literally turns your bones to dust with the power of his attacks. But it's alright, all you have to do is avoid all of that coming at you at the speed of light while you're marveling over just how cool he looks, and everything should be fine, right? On an extremely rare occasion, this isn't actually where Hollow evolution ends, as a Hollow named Ulquiorra was eventually able to discover a second stage to his resurrection, a state commonly known as Segunda Etapa. Now in Segunda Etapa, a Hollow has access to even further enhanced versions of what they could do in their previous forms, and really the only example we have of this from the series is Ulquiorra, who we just mentioned, as in his Segunda Etapa state Murcielago, he takes on a devilish imp-like appearance with furry legs, horns, and a tail, as just his physical power and speed alone are pushed to their absolute limits. Apart from that, the Espada is also able to use near instant regeneration to restore himself, but the most dangerous technique that this form gives him is his Lanza del Relampago, which is a long double-sided energy spear that he can create. This spear can be thrown, and the explosion that it creates is bigger than all of Las Noches, which itself is a massive area inside of Hueco Mundo. But he doesn't actually have to throw it, he can just use it like a sword or a spear close up, easily clashing with Ichigo's sword, despite him having to use his own completely new transformation to keep up. It's safe to say that when you look at the feats that Ulquiorra was capable of in this state, it made him one of the most powerful characters in the verse at that point, at least as far as we knew. But did you know Kubo actually created secondary forms for other Hollows? After a long week of protecting his friends from Hollows and dealing with some really personal family matters, as Ichigo protects Rukia during the time where she's still regaining her energy, we see Ichigo running towards a danger as suddenly he passes by a boy who sees Ichigo even though our MC is in his spirit form. From a roof nearby, this boy watches as Ichigo does a soul burial on a poor lost spirit, as time and time again Rukia and Ichigo respond to Hollow activity, only to find there's no Hollow there. Finally, after Ichigo pretty much screams out in his school hallway that he's going out for a Hollow to Rukia's annoyance, the boy overhears Ichigo and shows up at the scene wearing an all white and blue outfit, revealing that he knows there's a Hollow nearby, telling Ichigo that he shouldn't even call himself a Soul Reaper if he can't sense what direction the Hollow is in, as the boy Uryu flashes a small cross pendant on his wrist that fills up with his spiritual energy and forms a massive bow that he uses to shoot a bolt of energy across the neighborhood at a Hollow flying around, causing Rukia and Ichigo to realize that this guy has been taking all of their Hollow kills, as Uryu Ishida introduces himself and says he really hates Shinigami. We've explained how Soul Reapers take down Hollows and send souls to the Soul Society as part of their job, but now it's time to explain the next most important group of characters, the Quincies. First off, Quincies are humans who innately have the power to sense and use spiritual energy thanks to having a small fragment of their king's soul instilled in them. This led to a race of people in a very strict society that used their power and technologies to further their abilities and fight back against Hollows, leading you to think that they'd actually be close allies of the Soul Reapers, right? Well, because of the fact that when a Quincy kills a Hollow, it completely erases it from existence, versus how Soul Reapers send them back to the cycle of souls, this leads to a massive imbalance in the structure of the afterlife, and obviously brings Soul Reapers and Quincies into conflict. And while Shinigami use swords, Quincies often use bows and arrows made up of spiritual energy, with some using other really creative weapons, like we saw over the course of the Bleach 1000-year Blood War anime. Over the course of the series, we get teases that something is coming involving the Quincies, and in the final arc, we finally see everything play out, but before we can get there, let's explain every Quincy ability. These guys have their own unique secondary abilities beyond just creating holy arrows and spirit weapons. First off, Quincies manipulate Reishi, the spiritual matter of the universe, to do the things they do, like how they reinforce their own bloodstreams of Reishi to increase their defense, a technique called Blut Ven, which can protect you against some pretty powerful attacks. Besides that, they have the ability to fly and make high-speed movements by literally catching a ride on the Reishi in the air, a technique called Hiren Kyaku that is definitely extremely useful and versatile for people that use ranged techniques. Finally, Quincies also have the Ranso Tengai ability, and this is something we see Uryu do when his body isn't able to move anymore, and normally he wouldn't be able to fight. However, by creating and manipulating threads of pure spiritual energy, he's able to use his own body like a puppet, forcing it to move and continue fighting beyond its limits, which you can imagine would be extremely difficult, but it just looks and is really awesome. Now, if all of these aren't impressive enough, Quincies under their king's leadership have two more major abilities called the Shrift and the Volstandig, so let's start by explaining the Shrift next. Quincies and Bleach have a secret ultimate technique, and the worst part is it's unique to every single one of them. This becomes a major issue during the final 1000-year Blood War arc in the series. However, what exactly are these abilities, and how did they even get them? So first off, Shrifts are basically like an extra Quincy ability that every Quincy loyal to the king gets. After partaking in a ritual where they drink from his blood and gain a piece of his soul, they're granted a letter which he carves into their soul, and that letter, along with the bond to their fragment of Yuak's soul, determines the kind of ability they get. These abilities come from a god, so they're extremely broken sometimes, like Uryu's Shrift, the Antithesis, which allows him to reverse situations between two people, so he can even make it so he's winning a fight that he's been losing. Beyond him, there's also characters like Baz B, who was given letter H, the Heat, allowing him to create and control fire using his fingers, so you can see how an extra ability like this, on top of the 3 skills they're all supposed to learn, on top of their range abilities, makes Quincies really scary. But what if I told you they were still hiding one more thing? What do you do when you have nothing left? It's anime. Of course, you transform. And in Bleach, the Quincies are no different, as when faced with an enemy that it seems like it'll be almost impossible to defeat, every Quincy with the right knowledge and training has access to an all or nothing gambit, a technique known as Let's Still, or Quincy Final Style. Now, thanks to the special gloves all Quincies wear, they're able to remove the limiter on their ability to control the Reishi nearby by removing the glove. This gives them a massive power and speed boost, and also gives the user a single wing behind them, which acts as a gathered source of Reishi that they can use to create arrows or power any other ability they use. When Uryu uses this, it makes him powerful enough to defeat a captain in the Soul Society, which is especially cool since it let him literally turn his surroundings into energy that he was able to manipulate. However, the biggest drawback of this final gamble is that a Quincy loses their power after using this ability, so typically this would be the peak of their power. That is, until they evolved even further and awakened an even better final transformation ability that only the most loyal get to learn. So I guess we'll explain their final form next. Quincies have their own version of Bankai, and I promise it's nowhere near as easy to pronounce. We've explained pretty much every Quincy ability already, including their final transformation Let's Still. However, as the Quincies continue to advance their technology behind the scenes, combined with their worship of their leader, they were able to gain a much further perfected transformation called Volstandig, which not only gives them 2 wings instead of the one that the flawed version has, but this transformation also massively improves basically everything the Quincy is capable of doing, especially their Reishi absorption, which can really amp them up even further, as well as not only their use of their Shrift ability, but their projectiles as well. A good example of this is Bambietta, who we see in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and her ability lets her turn things into bombs, but when she uses her Volstandig ability, she is granted a pair of wings that also allow her to fire out projectile feathers, which can all be empowered by her Explode ability, allowing them to be extremely destructive. Ichigo realizes his greatest enemy has been with him this entire time, as during the end of Bleach in the final arc, we start to realize that there's something odd about the spirit of Ichigo's sword Zangetsu we've gotten to know over the course of this series. Despite the fact that Zangetsu was Ichigo's mentor and helped him a lot over the course of his journey, it was always weird that Ichigo seemed to have 2 spirits inside of Zangetsu, unlike everyone else that has 1. Eventually, we find out that this is because the hollow Ichigo is the real Zangetsu, but the other robed man is actually a manifestation of the Quincy powers hidden inside of Ichigo thanks to his mother, with those powers and her protective instincts merging into a being that would continue to protect her son while taking on the form of her king. Eventually, we saw that Ichigo had to decide between which of the Zangetsus he'd keep, and since this one wasn't willing to let him take all the power he needed to get the job done, it ended up fading away after a bit of a battle. However, I really like this mystery from the original series, and this blew my mind reading it when I was growing up, but what do you think about that foreshadowing? Ichigo has a lot of friends, but none is a truer homie than the man Chad himself. Back in the day during their school years, Ichigo met Chad after sort of knowing about him as the 2 of them ran into a bunch of bullies on the road, and Ichigo noticed that Chad refused to defend himself despite the fact that he's huge. Chad explains that he promised to never use his fist for his own sake, and he tells Ichigo that he lived in Mexico before he came to America. It's at this point where Ichigo notices Chad's necklace, as he explains it's more important to him than his life, and they both realize there's a cell phone next to them left open, sending a call to another location, so they kick it away and go home. As Chad is on the way home, he's attacked by a group of thugs who know he won't fight back now, and they take his precious necklace trying to break it and teach him a lesson, but that's when Ichigo comes flying in, grabbing a phone and calling for an ambulance, but not for him, as he counts out how many people are there and tells them there will be 5 victims before diving into fight and save his new friend, making an agreement where Chad will only hit people to help Ichigo, and in return, Ichigo will protect anything Chad wants to protect of his life, creating a lifelong bond between these 2 bros. In Bleach, it's not only people or animals that have souls, but every single object or anything you can interact with in the world has soul energy infused into it. So you could say on a certain level, everything has a soul in this universe. Because of this, of course, there are strange people who can sense and manipulate these souls to awaken interesting abilities, and in Bleach, people who awaken these abilities are known as Fullbringers. Every Fullbring user we've seen in the series so far has been a human, since they get the power from leftover hollow energy in their bodies due to attacks either in childhood or on their parents before they were born. However, the powers these characters get can be pretty vast and unique, or pretty boring. One example is Orihime's powers, which materialize as part of her hairpins, and her powers allow these hairpins to become physical beings that she can send out to heal her friends and block powerful attacks, even though it's a little more complicated than that. For Chad, his Fullbring powers manifest as a pair of large demon-style arms that he can use for offense and defense, giving him the strength of a high-class hollow. Lastly, we see Ichigo's Fullbring powers as he loses his Soul Reaper abilities, and what he ends up getting isn't all that different from being a Soul Reaper, despite looking nowhere near as cool. But now we'll go through every member of the secret Fullbringer organization Execution and explain their abilities as well. Ichigo thought he could trust them, but it ended up costing him his powers. This happens in Bleach after Ichigo already lost his Soul Reaper powers and tried to cultivate his new Fullbring abilities alongside other humans who had these powers too. But ultimately he's betrayed by the leader of Execution, Ginjo, who steals Ichigo's Fullbring powers to complete his own. Now Ginjo himself is a Fullbringer who, like Ichigo, was once a substitute Shinigami, so his powers work a bit differently from the others who only have Fullbring powers. Ginjo is somehow not only able to extract Ichigo's Fullbring energy from his body, but he's also extremely powerful and durable compared to a normal person. Beyond that, he carries a necklace with him called the Cross of Scaffold that he can turn into a sword, replacing his original Zanpakuto, but still giving him access to a sword of Shikai and Bankai when his powers are completed. With these powers, Ginjo is shown in the novels to be able to shave down energy, making range attacks against him pretty useless since he can cut them in half and more or less avoid them entirely or even negate weaker attacks, meaning this guy is very capable, and it's too bad he ended up being such a bad person because he has potential. Rukia had to leave Ichigo behind in the world of the living, and that happened early on in Bleach when her brother and his ally Renji went to get her and bring her back to the Soul Society, as Renji easily defeats Uryu and is about to finish him off before a massive sword crashes down next to him, making him leap away on instinct, as in front of him he sees a man he's never seen before. "Who the hell are you?" he says, as Ichigo stands there and responds, "I'm Ichigo Kurosaki, the man that's gonna beat you." Renji wonders what unit Ichigo is from and how he got that oversized sword, but as they stumble around confused for a bit, eventually Renji realizes Ichigo is a human who stole Rukia's powers, so he leaps in for the kill as Rukia's brother watches in the background. We see Ichigo struggling to keep up as he blocks a few blows before Renji spirals behind him and cuts him right down the back, making Ichigo drop to his knees as Renji says, "You're dead, it's over buddy, and after this Rukia will be executed all because of you, so what are you gonna do, Kurosaki?"